All right, so let's look at this. And that's actually what I did first off is I created a tasks JSON file in the same directory so we can pull from that. So we kind of mimic that request from the server. And here it is, just data inside of it and then the array of the objects we have inside of it right there. Let's go back to our page here. I also added these 4 lines right here. One is to import the libraries for the Angular HTTP module, which is the providers, the HTTP module, the response object, observables, and then a couple of operators that we'll be using. These are pretty standard when you do the AJAX calls with Angular, so just be aware of that. So let's start. Let's go here into our task service. The task service will be the one that does actually the call out to our server, and it will update this tasks variable right here with all the data. So no matter what component is pulling from this task service, it'll be updated in real time. So first off, we need to include the HTTP providers. So these providers can be included in just the component that is using the HTTP providers. But if we want the entire project to have the ability to utilize HTTP providers, what we can also do is go to the very, very bottom of our page when we're loading the initial app and include it right here. So I'm going to put here in the array HTTP providers, and there it is. That's first. So secondly, let's go back to our task service, and let's go over here and let's create a construct function, constructor, I should say. And inside of the constructor function, let's do the dependency injection and tell the task service to expect this module to be available to it. So we're going to use the HTTP module. We can keep it private. We don't need it to be public. So let's put here underscore HTTP as a variable name, type of HTTP, which is this object right here. I'm forcing it to be available into my task service. Awesome. So that's good. So now let's create let's invoke this and get the data out. So first off, let's go here to the task component. And we haven't really touched on this init implements that we have on here. But really what this does is when the component module is done loading on initialize, essentially, it's going to run this block of code. And this is where this can be convenient, because maybe this is the point in time where I want to trigger my task service to go out to the web and grab data and bring it back. So let's call here on the task service. And let's call on get tasks. Cool. I'm going to run this function. Now, we have not created a function yet, so if anything, it would give me an error right here. So let's create a function called get tasks in our task service. Go back up here, go to our task service. Let's create one called get tasks. And let's make sure this part is working so far. Let's console log here, getting tasks. Switch over to our HTML. There it is. And let's try this one more time. Let's refresh the page, and there it is, getting tasks. So we know we're getting to that point. Let's go back to our page. And now let's add the code to get this to give me the tasks. So, all right, so let's use this HTTP module. So let's start off with this instance of the HTTP module.get. And this is where we want to get this is going to be the URL, right? So we can do any kind of URL here. We're just going to do tasks.json because it's the same. I'm going to put slash here to start from tasks.json, which is the same file directory. So we should be able to get the data from this. Now, the data that comes back, let's map through all the data. And just bear with me for a second here. I'm going to make it so that the response object that comes back is a type of response object. This has to do with this part right here. Doesn't necessarily have to be there, but I'm just making sure that the object that comes back is a type of response. And then once that happens, I can set the response object and change it to a JSON type object and call on the data. Awesome. So now let's change this to give us back a promise. And a promise is pretty much saying when and if the server calls back, this object that I'm creating here, I'm going to store it in the variable called a promise. And so then I can use this variable and call on a function, a trigger function called then, to be able to grab the data when it gets to me. So here's my map to get all the data that came back and make sure that it's all in JSON format. This is to change it over to a promise. And that's really all we need there. Next step is to just call on a promise, dot then, and the result is going to be tasks, which is going to be an array, and I'm going to store this tasks variable, the data that came back into that variable here. So let's say tasks from server, that's the variable that I'm getting back from the promise, and I'm going to say here this dot tasks is going to equal to the tasks from server. Oops. There we go. And now let's give this a shot. After this is done, we should be able to see the tasks update. So let's take a look at this. And there it is, actually. It updated immediately. Let's refresh the page and see that again. There's a little bit of a delay, and that's that delay of catching the data. But now it's locally on my computer, so that'll happen pretty quickly. And the reason why we see objects there is because this task object is one part of this tasks array, and each part of that is an object. So we have to call on title or completed or created to see the data. So let's go on here, dot title, for example. Let's save it. Let's go over here. Let's see it come back, and there it is. First task, second task, third task, fourth task. So go back here and recap real quick. All we did is we made it so that as soon as our tasks component loads, once it initializes, we're going to call the task service and execute the get tasks function. And that is going to invoke this little block of code. And this is simply going to go out, get us the data from the tasks.json file, make sure that the response.json, the response is a JSON type object, excuse me. And then we're going to turn it into a promise. That's going to return us the promise here in this variable, which is actually, in that case, we can send it to a component if we wanted to, but we'll leave it here for now. And right afterwards, I can call on that promise and say, then, as in when the server responds, give me the response of the server and store it into this .tasks. So it's going to take the response from the server, store into this instance of the tasks, which is this thing right here. And because the other components, or the task components rather, is calling on that task service and is directly pointing to that tasks variable right here, it's going to update them in real time.